It is common knowledge among the media nerds at this point that Star Wars is an absolutely dead brand. One that somehow finds ways to sink even further into the hole as the years progress. It is so far beyond the point of redemption that even when something great like Andor manages to slip its way through the cracks, despite its quality, it's unable to move the needle whatsoever. And after the conclusion of Andor Season 2, the conclusion of a series with some of the only true filmmaking artists that have graced the Star Wars brand in decades, a sad thought crossed my mind. Star Wars will likely never be that good again. The future of this IP under Disney Lucasfilm looks utterly depressing. Today, I'm going to take a look at everything that is slated to come out for Star Wars in the near future in 2026. A quick disclaimer before we start, I know a number of different books, comics, games, of course will be releasing, but on this channel I more so focus on the major media releases like shows and movies, so that's all I'll be taking a look at today. So with that disclaimer out of the way, let us begin, shall we? Before we get into 2026, there are a couple of miniseries coming at the end of 2025 that I'll mention briefly. Firstly, the third season of Star Wars Visions is set to release in late October. Now, I've never been someone that cared that much about these little non-canonical anime shorts, but if that's your thing, then more power to you, I guess. I might tune in, but the first two seasons didn't impress me at all, so it's a toss-up for me whether I'll get around to watching it. And secondly, the second season of LEGO Star Wars Rebuild the Galaxy is set to come out in a couple of weeks. To my surprise, I actually quite like the first season. This is probably the closest thing we'll ever get to a LEGO Star Wars movie, so I'll take what I can get. And I'm definitely pretty excited about it for what it's worth. But with that out of the way, let's get on to the meat and potatoes of today's discussion, the much bigger and more important projects. The first big thing of note that we know is coming is Ahsoka Season 2, which has me about as excited as listening to a Kathleen Kennedy interview.
I think The Rise of Skywalker, it doesn't answer anything.
I remember in the lead up to Season 1, a subset of people were so excited, not just because it was going to serve as a continuation of Rebels, but also because they thought that Dave Filoni was finally going to be able to have a full-on creative orgasm without any interference. People still believe that studio interference was the real reason why Book of Boba Fett and Mandalorian Season 3 were abominations. Oh, Kathleen Kennedy and the studio were getting in the way, and Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni didn't actually have any control. It couldn't possibly be that they suck at their jobs. Well, he had full control on this one, and he pumped out an absolute piece of shit. In actuality, this show was mind-numbingly dull and terribly written. It thinks it's telling a grand and deeply meaningful story, but actually isn't really about much of anything at all, and feels very vapid. This show entirely relies on the thrill of hardcore Star Wars fans, or more specifically, hardcore Filoni fans, getting to see Filoni's Rebels characters make the jump to the live-action realm. And it shows, because Ahsoka failed to capture anywhere near the sort of widespread interest that earlier Star Wars projects were able to generate, and the streaming numbers are just proof of that. The pacing is painfully slow, stretching out what was realistically the amount of content that would fill a 2-hour movie into an 8-episode season of television. But the worst part about Ahsoka for me has to be the utterly terrible character writing. Starting off, for a show titled Ahsoka, you'd expect the title character to be more than just a blank piece of wood, but that's really all she is. Her line delivery is almost entirely monotone, to the point where she could give Keira Knightley a run for her money.
Beware, Viceroy. The Federation has gone too far this time.
Her sole direction was to cross her arms and look stoic. It is a completely lifeless, soulless version of Ahsoka compared to what we are generally accustomed to seeing with Ashley Eckstein's version. And this is coming from someone who thought she did a decent enough job in Mandalorian Season 2. So I think this more so comes down to the direction and Rosario having very little to work with as an actress. Sabine is just as unlikable here as she is in Rebels, but it's dialed up even higher. Despite her being way too overpowered for someone her age in Rebels, they decided that it wasn't enough, cause now she's a Jedi despite her having a very weak connection to the Force. This is literally said in the show.
I only spoke the truth. The Jedi Order would not have accepted her. She is not an acceptable candidate.
Her self-centered and terrible qualities as a human being are just casually brushed over, despite her deciding that finding her friend was more important despite the high risk that it could result in the reformation of the Imperial military, which would lead to another galactic war. Grand Admiral Thrawn, one of my favorite Star Wars characters, is completely butchered. This is what happens when you have dumb people trying to write really smart people. He's not smart. He's not at all intimidating like he is in the EU. He is simply someone who poses as smart, talks a big game, but cannot back it up. He's constantly losing. And only at the very end, when he's very narrowly able to escape a couple of Jedi on dogs despite all of the resources he has at his disposal, he treats it like it's some major victory. So you may be asking, why on earth is the show getting a season 2? Well, because Dave Filoni wants it. With him now being the chief creative officer at Lucasfilm, that pretty much means that every one of his ideas can become a reality if he so chooses, regardless of how poor they are. And since Dave has a fetish for all of his original ideas, unable to kill them off or let them go for the good of the story, rest assured that we will be seeing these characters for a long time, whether we like it or not. As we look ahead at Season 2, I also don't really know how they're going to weave all of these storylines into one cohesive show, cause it's all branched off into so many different directions. Ahsoka and Sabine are stranded on Peridia to do, well, who the fuck knows what now? I guess they're just going to have to wait for Ezra to jump in a space whale and rescue them, because that's a broken mechanic that Filoni just decided to will into existence all the way back in Rebels. Baylan abandoned his apprentice to go pursue power or something vague. Shin has declared herself leader of the locals, and of course, Thrawn has returned from the far galaxy back to the main Star Wars galaxy. Because of this fact now that the show is going to be stretched out over so many different places, with a bunch of different storylines which I don't see really relating to each other all that much at the current moment in the story, I have a feeling this isn't really going to feel like the Ahsoka show anymore, more so just this week in the Filoniverse. Cause that's the direction that all of Filoni's live action projects are heading in now. They're all just focused on setting up what's to come, trying to tie in to what's supposed to be Filoni's endgame-like Star Wars movie to cap off the Filoniverse. However, this is all speculation of course, so I'll save some of my judgment until we get a trailer or some reliable in-depth detail on the direction that the story is headed in. Moving on though, the only thing on the 2026 slate that I do at least have some mild hope for is the new Darth Maul animated show, Maul Shadow Lord. Now yes, I understand this is also another Dave Filoni headed project, but I've always thought that he's better in the animated sphere. Not great, but definitely better. I also think it's worth pointing out that on this one, while Dave might be the executive producer, he isn't the lead writer like he is for Ahsoka. That title belongs to Matt Michnovitz, who has written for Clone Wars, Rebels, and Bad Batch in the past. Also, the fact that Sam Witwer is so intimately involved, considering this is a show about his character, does give me a little bit of optimism, considering I think he's one of the only few people involved with Star Wars on a regular basis that actually has a pretty good understanding of what Star Wars is and what the fans are looking for. There's also the fact that Maul has been a character that has consistently been good in quality in the animated sphere. His storyline in the Clone Wars Season 4 and 5 is some of my personal favorite Star Wars ever. In Season 7, he's also pretty good. I just don't like the fact that his power level was nerfed so heavily to the point where he'd lose in a fight to Ahsoka, considering that just a few months prior he held his own against Sidious, but that's a debate for another time. I don't want to get into it here. He was also pretty solid in Rebels, and probably the best part of Season 3 for me. So when you take all that into account, you'd think that the show would likely be good, but of course that's the question. Will the show in fact be good? Something to remember, or just the newest member of the Dave Filoni Disney Plus slop train. This show is set to take place during the Imperial era, shortly after the rise of the Empire. Now the only other show that we've seen set at that part in the timeline was Dave Filoni's most recent animated project, The Bad Batch. There's a saying that you're only as good as your last performance, and The Bad Batch I thought was a downgrade from Clone Wars in every single way. Although it was a spin-off sequel of the Clone Wars and followed many of the same characters, the show felt very directionless, telling many non-consequential stories just to fill time. The character development was really monotone and uninspired. And it wasn't until the third season until I really started to care at all about what was even going on. But despite all of those shortcomings, Maul Shadow Lord isn't really an apples-to-apples comparison to that show, besides the fact that it takes place during the same part of the timeline. Yes, I guess you could say that it is another Clone Wars spin-off sequel, but it's surrounding a completely different set of characters in a completely different setting. We're going to get to see Maul rebuild the Shadow Collective after the chaos of the ending of the Republic to the strong and intimidating organization that we see in Solo. So the premise of the show has me intrigued. There are a number of different ways you could take it, and a number of different elements, planets, organizations, you name it, that can be explored here. Perhaps this show can deliver on the promise that The Mandalorian in the Book of Boba Fett couldn't, of being a well thought out and in-depth exploration of the Star Wars underworlds. There is a leaked trailer online that was shown shown at a panel a while back, which I thought looked pretty good. The one thing that has everybody talking is that it appears that Darth Talon from Legends will be making her debut in canon. Now, Lucasfilm does not have a good track record of respecting Legends material or faithfully adapting it. The obvious example that just comes to the top of my head was the butchering of Thrawn in Ahsoka, as we discussed earlier. However, I am at least still intrigued to see what they do, despite my confidence being low. They have about a 10-year time gap with her before she logically should have been showing up or at least mentioned in other canon material, so hopefully they tell a story with her that's well done and actually worth telling. And finally, moving on to the biggest upcoming project, that of course being Star Wars' return to the theaters after what will be 7 years with The Mandalorian and Grogu. The fact that this is the idea that they chose to go with for their theatrical return is still a decision I find a little baffling. Yes, it is true back in 2019 with Mandalorian Season 1, and to a lesser but notable extent in 2020 with Mandalorian Season 2, the show absolutely took the world by storm. But that cultural interest quickly lessened as the show got worse and worse. The proof is in the numbers. Mandalorian Season 3 streaming numbers paled in comparison to Season 1 according to the most reliable third-party sources. But despite that fact, this is the only thing that Disney has created with some cultural relevance that they can bank on, that they think will get butts in seats. But I do not think that it is going to turn out as well as they think it will for a couple of reasons. For one, taking a Disney Plus original show and turning it into a movie to be released in theaters immediately is going to alienate a large portion of the general audience that you are trying to capture. Because if they haven't bothered watching the show, then what makes you think that they're going to care about the movie? And even if Mandalorian and Grogu is a very self-contained story that doesn't really require you to see seasons 1 through 3 to have a general understanding of what's going on, I still don't think that's going to be enough to sway casuals into seeing this film. I'm calling it here. I don't see this film making more than $600 million worldwide, max. Back in 2018, when the Star Wars brand wasn't in as quite of bad of a state as it's in right now, came the release of Solo, the only other film under Disney Star Wars to come out in May, and it only made about $393 million worldwide, or about $504 million in today's money. And that was the origin story about one of the most beloved characters in cinematic history, not a spin-off movie of a fucking Disney Plus show. And the early story leaks for this film aren't looking too appetizing either. From what we know so far, Mandalorian and Grogu is shaping up to be no more than a filler episode you'd be accustomed to seeing in the show. From what we allegedly know so far, Dave is going to recycle one of his storylines from the Clone Wars movie and reskinning it a little bit. So Mando is going to be hired by Sigourney Weaver to rescue Rota the Hutt, who you will remember as Jabba the Hutt's son, who is now grown up and is a jacked gladiator. And the big bad that's going to get in Mando's way is Embo, who was a pretty cool but very niche bounty hunter character from the Clone Wars. Now, out of all the ways I thought Star Wars might return to the big screen, I gotta tell ya, I was not expecting this. And if these leaks are true, or mostly true, I think it is going to backfire on them tremendously. But similar to Ahsoka, I'll wait and save my judgment until we get something more concrete, like a trailer or something. But there are some leaked trailers floating around online that aren't really hard to find, and it's seeming like these leaks are mostly accurate, which is very concerning. But I'll guess we'll just have to wait and see. So that just about wraps up all the major things coming for Star Wars in 2026. As you can tell, I am less than enthused. I have zero faith left in my body. It is a 99% chance it will be another deeply disastrous year for the Star Wars brand. But you never know, maybe we should all just give Kathy the benefit of the doubt. With all that being said though, that's just about going to wrap up today's video. If you've made it this far and you've enjoyed, then please consider leaving a like and hitting that subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. It helps out this channel a lot, so any support would be greatly appreciated. Also, as always, take to the comments below and let me know your guys' thoughts on the 2026 slate for Star Wars. I'm personally not very excited, but I'm interested to hear your guys' opinions on what's to come in the immediate future. As well as let me know your guys' thoughts on the current state of the Star Wars brand and what you think it's going to look like moving forward. But anyways, that's all I got for today. I will see you guys in the next one.